Does George Orwell's Animal Farm still hold up 81 years after it was initially published? Well, you're going to have to listen to the episode to find out. Hey, howdy, hey, and welcome to another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Biblical, the podcast where we talk about how stories are not the gospel, but the best stories point to the gospel and the other truths found in Scripture. I'm your host. My name is Josh. Thank you so much again for taking the time to listen today. Today's story, we are taking it back, way back to 1945. Today's story is a book called Animal Farm. If for some reason you did not read this book in middle school or high school, here is the gist. Animal Farm is a novella, which is a fancy word for a short novel, written by English author George Orwell, and it was published in 1945, which was 81 years ago. It tells the story of a group of anthropomorphic animals. We are just rolling in the vocab words today. Another fancy word meaning animals that speak and act like human beings. They live on a farm and they decide to rebel against the human masters and live free lives. However, over time, the rebellion and the cause seem to change right before the animals' eyes. So let's talk about the good. In talking about the good of Animal Farm, I thought it was interesting for me to read this book, not having a lot of knowledge about the Russian Revolution of 1917. Now, you might be thinking, what are you talking about? What does real life history have to do with a bunch of talking animals? Well, this book was written to be an allegory, meaning that all of the characters and events that happen in this story are a one-for-one for real life events and real life people in history. The 1917 Russian Revolution was the people of Russia rebelling against the monarchy that they had, the king and the czar is what they call it in Russia, and the Soviet totalitarianism that rised, and Joseph Stalin's communism. And so this was a critique of that, written by George Orwell. I don't know a lot of that history. When I was reading the book, I literally did a Google search. Okay, which character represents which person? And then even when it says, oh, this person was this, I was like, I don't know who that is. So I thought it was interesting. Okay, I don't know what those things are, and I don't know the one for one. So how does this story stand? I'm not going to do a deep dive into all that. I just want to take the story for what it is. And I think what makes this story so great is that this story does stand apart by itself just as a story. You can see the plight of the animals. They're not being stewarded well by their farmer. They want to rebel against that and they're tired of it. And one day enough is enough, and they without even really planning it, they get the farmer out and they are running the farm themselves. They need somebody to kind of take over the management of like the day-to-day operations. So the pigs kind of take that role and responsibility. And without the animals realizing it, the pigs start to control things in the way that they want it to go. And that's what the story is really, that's what it's all pointing to and kind of leading towards. So I think that shows the strength of the story. You don't have to know the history to understand it and to be moved by it, and that's one of the great strengths of it. Another great strength is that I think that we need more stories that aren't just super happy and chipper all the time. This book is about talking animals. It is depressing. I'll just say it like that. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me highlight a specific scene for you. So, like I said, the animals have been under new leadership with the pigs. We have Napoleon, and he has this idea for them to create a windmill. He tells the animals this will help us, with production and maybe generating electricity down the line. So the animals get really hyped about it. And there is a horse and a donkey. Okay, the horse's name is Boxer. He is one of the hardest working animals on the farm. He is Napoleon's biggest supporter. He basically says if Napoleon says it, then that's true. And he just pumps everybody up. Everybody just loves him so much. And then there's Benjamin. Benjamin is the curmudgeon donkey who doesn't really get close with anybody, but he without really saying it so much, really loves Boxer, and they are really tight. When Animal Farm was started and they put together all these rules and everything like that, they talk about kind of like how human beings retire. They come up with these rules for animals to eventually retire after they get to a certain age. So Boxer and Benjamin are both getting to that age. Benjamin's even way older, but Boxer is like, okay, I'm working towards retirement, but I want to make sure that the animals are set up for success. So I'm going to work even harder. I'm going to get in, to use human terms, I'm going to clock in early so that way I can get some stuff done and try to, get this project moving forward. And without, like I said, realizing it, the animals don't see what the pigs are all doing in the background to make everything better for them. And they have a kind of a PR person, Squealer, who is a pig, and he just basically, if anything pops up that's kind of weird, he kind of assuages it. He's like, okay, don't worry about this. This is the reason why that happened and stuff like that. Well, one day, Boxer goes to work on the windmill by himself because that's just what he does. And it comes to find out that Boxer broke his leg while he was working on the windmill. The animals are super upset for him. And, okay, this is my second time recording this, so I'm going to try to keep it together. But he breaks his leg, and Squealer comes out, and he's like, oh, Boxer, we're so sorry. We're going to call for somebody to come and to take you to a hospital. And so, obviously, that'd be great. So that way I can get my leg mended. And he's like, I was just trying to finish the windmill so that way you guys could be set up, but maybe it's time for me to retire and stuff like that. So the van comes, and Benjamin, because of the training of the pigs, they know now how to read. So Benjamin sees the car that comes to get Boxer, and he starts freaking out. And he says, everybody, do you not see what is going on? They are taking, this is an old book. They're taking Boxer to the knackers. He reads it. Do you not see? It says that it's a glue factory, horse exterminator. And the animals are like, wait, what? Like they didn't even realize that. They can read as well, but not as well. And so they start saying, Boxer, get out of there, get out of there. And then it just says they never saw Boxer ever again. Squealer has a story saying, hey, that he's fine. He's going to the hospital. He just, they just didn't have time to fix the lettering on the side and stuff like that. So, again, that's towards the end of the book, but like, holy cow, how sad is that? Not really one that makes me want to be like, woohoo, but it's trying to gut check the reader, trying to show you, hey, who are you listening to? What are the people who are in your lives that are your leaders, and how much power do you give them? Are you thinking for yourself? That is very, very high goals that this story has for being about one that has talking animals. And I'm not saying that there is no lightheartedness or humor to be found. There are some fun stereotypes with the animals that it plays into. For example, like Boxer is, like I said, he's the hardworking one. Benjamin is the curmudgeon donkey, which makes sense for an old donkey. There's a cat, and he shows up when he wants to, but then whenever work is to be done, he just kind of goes away. So there's little fun things like that to be had, especially if you've had any experience with these kinds of animals. But overall, because you are reading it from the outside looking in from the animal's perspective, the animals don't understand everything, but you as the audience member does, and that's what makes it sad. You're like, ugh. Every time the pigs make a change that's not fair to the animals, and the animals are just, okay, going along with it, your heart just breaks. You're like, oh, guys, no, don't you see what they're doing? And it just kind of is making the point that if we are not careful, history will repeat itself. So all those things put together, I would say, are the good, and we as a society need to be reminded of those kinds of things. One more minor quick plug. This is not sponsored, but I wish that it was. If you are somebody who likes audiobooks, they made an animated remake of this movie that came out earlier this year. Now, I can't vouch for it. From what I've seen online, it looks like they've made a lot of changes to the story, but the director of the movie is Andy Serkis. Now, Andy Serkis is famous from, obviously, 13 Going on 30. He plays the boss. I'm totally kidding. He's not famous for that, even though he does a great job in that. He is famous for playing Gollum in Lord of the Rings, King Kong and Caesar in the Planet of the Apes remake movies. he is the director of that movie. And as kind of, I think, a way to promote the movie, he did the audiobook, and he is phenomenal at reading the book. He is a trained voice actor, and he's also done other audiobooks. I highly recommend his readings of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He has a specific character voice for every single character. I was listening to his reading when I got to that section that I talked about with Boxer earlier, and him playing Benjamin and screaming and pleading to the animals was just something on another level. And I think that's what kind of got me emotional and thinking about this and trying to record this a couple of times. So I cannot recommend it enough. So if you would like to re-engage with this story and you haven't done so in a long time, check it out on audiobook because he does a phenomenal job. So that's the good. And now on to the bad. Kind of similar to the Toy Story episode, I've just got to be super nitpicky for this section. I am not going to get on any kind of a soapbox and say, hey, George Orwell, let me show you how to write a story. I think, you could improve a little bit here. Obviously, also, George Orwell is no longer with us, so I can't really talk to him that way. But I am not going to try to, elevate myself or say that I know how to write a better story or make a better story. I'm just saying, again, from my perspective and what I believe needs to be said. So the kind of stories that I like to engage in have a single protagonist that goes on a journey, oftentimes emotional, where they grow as a person. For example, I'm going to talk about, just Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit, okay? He starts off as somebody who likes his creature comforts. He doesn't really go on adventures, but then over the course of the story, he goes on a grand adventure and then comes back a totally different person, one that none of his neighbors and family recognize at all. So that's just great, and it's easy for me as a reader to be able to follow with that. Now, I know that I said everything about Boxer just made me emotional and all that kind of stuff, but there is not one single person or character that you're following in this book. There's the cast of characters, the cast of the animals, and it kind of reads like a history book. Whereas, if you're reading a history book, you might have a couple of characters pop up and say, oh, there's Abraham Lincoln, or there's Tsar Nicholas from the Russian Revolution, but there's not one person that you're particularly following. And that can be maybe negative as far as there wasn't somebody to really connect with or say, oh, okay, how did they feel going through all of that? It's just giving you the events. So that's one part. There's not really somebody to follow. Another part is that while this story does work without knowing the events of the Russian Revolution of 1917, I can see that everything would be just kind of taken to the total next level if you did know all of those things. If you were like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that he took that event in world history and made it about animals. That is just so cool. That obviously is just going to make it better, but I believe that the best stories don't require homework. So this story would be enhanced if you wanted to, do your research and do all that kind of thing, watch maybe a couple of YouTube videos. I don't think that that's the story's fault, but it was written to be an allegory. It's not like Lord of the Rings where people read into it and then J.R.R. Tolkien was like, no, this is not an allegory. Stop putting your ideas into my story. That's not what's happening here. No, that's what George Orwell is doing. He's like, this is written to be a critique of this time in history. So if you're not somebody who likes talking animals, if you're somebody who doesn't know a lot about history and don't want to do history, and you like somebody to be able to follow like I do, that might be something that might hamper you enjoying this story as much as you could. But again, super nitpicky, a classic, and with me rereading it, I highly recommend giving it another shot. So that's the bad. And now onto the biblical. The biggest theme that we see in Animal Farm is one of revolutions turning back into the very thing that they were trying to revolutionize against. The animals wanted to go against the human owners that they had, and then it just turns out that the new owners that they have, without even realizing it, the pigs are about as bad, if not worse, than Farmer Jones, the man who was taking care of them before. So what they do at the beginning of this revolution is they come up with 7 commandments saying, hey, this is animalism, this idea that the old pig at the very, very beginning of everything kind of came up with. So they come up with these rules to kind of highlight this is all of animalism summed up in one thing. Over time, there's one of the older animals who remembers, says, man, I feel like what the pigs are doing is not right. I feel like we had talked about not sleeping in a bed before. So she goes over to the rules, to the 7 commandments they painted them on the side of the farmhouse, and it says now, no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. She's like, I don't remember that. And then there's a pig who comes out, and he's basically like the PR person for the pigs of like, oh, no. Like we've, I mean, there's nothing wrong about beds. It's just sheets. Sheets are the human thing that are wrong. Another rule is no animal shall drink alcohol. But then the pigs find the alcohol in the farmer's house, and then the next day the animal's looking and it says, no animal shall drink alcohol to excess. So all of these things keep changing, and the animals are like, I feel like it used to be something else, but it's not a sense where they're like, hey, the pigs are changing the rules. We see that as the readers, but the animals really just are so stuck in their monotony of life and trying to work for their freedom that they think that they're doing, that they don't realize that they're being fooled and they're being manipulated by the pigs. And that is something that we need to be careful about. And there's a couple of things that I think are very interesting from a Christian perspective. Number 1, let's go to Deuteronomy 6:4, which says this, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So where is the word of the Lord? Where is the law of the Lord supposed to be? Literally everywhere in our lives, because if we don't do that, then we're going to forget and we're not going to obey them the way that we should. There is a correlation between the 7 commandments and the 10 commandments, obviously, but what happens to the animals? They don't put these commandments before their eyes, and so they forget. And when they forget, they're able to be taken advantage of. So the Lord does not take advantage of us. He is our creator. He, as believers, he is our Father. He is our Savior of our souls. So he is not trying to get us. He's trying to bring us into the life that we were created intentionally to have as his image bearers. So his law is life to us. It is not something that he is trying to, here are the rules that you have to follow. It's we get to live this life that we were actually made to be in. But if we don't remember, we're so sinful, we're so forgetful that we are either going to be moved away by the world, or we're going to be moved away by our own sinful flesh. So we need to be careful. And the animals in Animal Farm show us that if we are not careful, then we can be taken advantage of very quickly. Wow. And thinking about that, it takes us back all the way to Genesis, the original sin. What happens here? It says, Genesis 3, Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, Did God actually say, You shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Again, he's taking what God said and totally twisting it. He knows that's not what God said. And what does Eve say? The woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Did God say anything about touching it? All he said was, do not eat of it. Now, it was probably a good idea not to touch it. Don't get anywhere close to that. Put a fence around it. Just leave it alone. But I see in that instance, Eve is putting words into God's mouth. And that is something that we do not ever want to do. We want to go back to the word. What does the word say? Not What do I remember the word saying? Unless you've memorized it, unless you have written it so much in your heart, like what Deuteronomy says, we need to be careful to not ever be in a place where we're like, I think this is what God says, and I think this is what He wants from me. We need to be people that say, no, I know my God, I know His word, and this is what He would want me to do in this situation. So that's one part of the biblical that I think is a great part of this cautionary tale. Continuing on with that is that we need to be mindful, again, of the word, but also of the world that we're going into. Matthew 10:16, Jesus is talking to His disciples, so obviously this is intended for them, but we can obviously apply it to ourselves as well. He says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." What the heck does that mean? What that is saying, what Jesus is saying to us is, you need to be mindful. Be innocent to the things of the world. Do not be worldly. Do not be somebody who is well versed in the sins and the ways of the world. But also don't be foolish. Do not be gullible. Know the difference between right and wrong. And that is definitely something that we want to do with this show here, with the good, the bad, the biblical. What is the world saying is good that's not actually good with these stories? So that is what the animals did not do, and they pay for it towards the end. Actually, they pay for it throughout the majority of the story. Like I said, not a very happy-go-lucky talking animals story. And then one more thing that I want to speak about and to think about is rebelling against authority. We obviously know that this is an allegory. We obviously know this is a story where animals talk. Do animals really talk? Depends on the person you talk to, I suppose, but no, they do not talk. They do not think the same way that we do. They do not have a sense of justice. They are different creatures that the Lord has created and are beautiful and proclaim His glory, but they are not made in His image. That being said, there is something interesting about these animals in their God-given roles, rebelling against those roles and wanting to take care of themselves. We as Americans love freedom. We love liberty. This was written by a British man who is technically a socialist, so it gets kind of dicey and it's interesting, but we love freedom, right? Everybody should be free. You should be able to do what you want. And that's what freedom is. That's not what freedom is, but that's neither here nor there. Romans 3:2 says, "Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." Now, obviously, we need to, again, be wise. What does this mean? Is this meaning, oh, well, okay, if my authority says for me to do that, then I must do that. But who's our ultimate authority? Our ultimate authority is the Lord. So if an authority is telling us to do something that goes against what we believe as Christians and what God commands us to do, then obviously we need to say our ultimate allegiance is to the Lord. Look back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who the law of the land was, you need to bow down and worship this thing. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. And we know that our God can save us, but even if we don't, we are not going to disobey and worship you, King. Again, their friend Daniel, you shall only worship and pray to the king. And what does Daniel do? He goes outside of his way to make sure that everybody knows, no, I'm still praying to my God 3 times a day. So obviously we need to be mindful of that. But this does not give us the means to be able just to buck back against authority whenever we want to. These animals were in the care of this farmer. Was rebelling the best thing? By the end of the book, I would say no, because they're in the exact same spot as far as what they desire. They wanted their freedom. They have not been free, and they are not free for the majority of the story. I think that we need to be careful reading this book and thinking, yeah, revolution is good, or looking back at our history. It's kind of an interesting thought that I've talked about with other people of like, should we have even gone through the American Revolution as believers? We can't go back and change it now, and obviously I don't want to change it. I'm so thankful that I live in a free nation where I can even have a Christian podcast and speak about my faith. But was that something that was ordained by the Lord? Obviously, yes. Was it something that would have been condoned by the Lord? That's something that's up for debate, but something that I think we really need to think about whenever we think about freedom and revolution. And I think we have this idea of like, yeah, revolting is the best, and it's free because we're going against the tyranny, when the Lord might have us in that place for a reason. Did Jesus come to free the Jews from the Roman authority and government? No, he did not. As Christians, we serve not a socialist party, not a Republican party, not a democracy. We serve a monarchy. We serve the one true King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and we are ultimately not long-term residents in this place. We are looking forward to a heavenly country where he reigns and rules over all. So, things to think about of be mindful of what you want, because you might just get it, and that might not be what the Lord has for us. So, that's the biblical. So how would I rank George Orwell's Animal Farm? Well, I already was really loving it when I just finished my read-through recently, but throughout the process of recording this episode, my affection for it grew. Even with my nitpick where I said, you can't even follow one main character, the fact that I felt some kind of a something because of just the love and the affection that these animals have for each other, and just how they really do care for the cause, and how the injustice of it all going the wrong way, it just really moves you, and it really scares me as far as thinking about where I would be if it weren't for the Lord and his grace over my life every day. So all that being said, does this story hold up? Yeah, it definitely does. And I would give Animal Farm 9 windmills out of 10. It's really, really good. I would go so far as to say 10 out of 10, but the only reason I'm not going to do that is because I have not revisited this story multiple times throughout the years. This is, I think, my second time ever reading it through. First time was mandatory in high school, but I would say, man, keep on making it mandatory as long as they can. I know that schools historically here recently have not been, doing well about keeping the classics and just having those great stories be brought to the forefront of young people's minds. I would say keep this in there. Make sure that this continues to be read, so that way generations of people can remember the sins of the past. That way it does not get repeated in the future. So there's Animal Farm. And that's it for today's episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Biblical. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to listen. I really do appreciate it. What do you think of Animal Farm? Or what was a book that you had to read in middle school or high school? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comments, and maybe we'll cover it in another episode. Your comments and your likes and your shares really do help, and so I really do appreciate it. For next week's episode, the hint is bullseye. Until then, my name is Josh, and man, some bacon sounds pretty good right now. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things.